These lives are always tricky to find. Hey, Donna, good to see you.
Good to see you, David.
Nice to see you again. You're one of my favorite people in the world. Hey, Brennan, nice to see you.
Hi, David. Nice to see you too.
And folks, when you come on, say hello to us so that I at least know we're here and broadcasting. I always try to find us too, but you always seem to find us quicker than I do. All right, let's see. There we are. Good. All right. People are beginning to join. Say hello when you come on. It's a lovely day here in Los Angeles. What's it like there in Portland?
It's a little overcast and I don't know, maybe 57, 56, but we'll take it.
It's not raining.
Well, let's see. I see Shirley's here from Pennsylvania and Sandra's here from New York. Sandra's my mom's name, so I always love a Sandra. Hey, Vivian from New York. Good to see you. I'm glad people are finding us. Welcome, welcome. If you're brand new, you can say hello, but you don't have to say hello. It's completely up to you. You know, I always say there's so many different people. Some of us are engagers, others of us are back row sitters. So whatever you want to be, just like in grief, there's no right way, so you get to be you. Hey, Mike from Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Jennifer from an Alaska fishing boat. Are you kidding? Like, first of all, I just want to go, you have Wi-Fi on an Alaska fishing boat, but it's probably on your phone. Hey, Mary from New York, Terry from Indiana. I joke about, I don't know if you two remember this at all, but when I was growing up, there was Romper Room. Brennan, you're too young to remember that. I think you might be too, Donna.
No, I don't think so.
I think I'm the old person here in the crowd. But there used to be Romper Room, and the teacher would say, I see Andrea and Chantal. And
yep.
So Andrea says she loves Portland. Moved from Portland to Denver in 2014. Let's see. Hey, Diane from SoCal, Cheryl from Virginia. We're going to have a really good discussion tonight, so I'm glad you're all here. Naomi from the Bay Area, welcome, welcome. Good to see you. Sandra remembers Romper Room. All right, I'm not the only one. Faruza, hello from Marina Del Rey. Hi, thank you. You're very comforting. Oh, I try. Hey, Ivy from Chelsea in New York. Welcome, welcome. I'm glad to see all the different places. During the day session, it's funny because the UK is going to sleep and Australia is waking up. So they're all saying hello and good night. Hey, Ketty from Puerto Rico. Daryl from Santa Cruz. Good to see you. I'm glad to see folks coming on. So if you haven't been on, I'm David Kessler, and I come on every evening with a wonderful people like the two we have tonight who volunteer their time because this group was started because of COVID-19. And as the world's talking about reopening and moving on, we all know if you've had a death, you're not moving on and your world has been changed forever. And so we're all here to let you know that you matter and we care and we want to give you some information to help you during this difficult time. So during the day, I come on and give you different tools and techniques. And in the evening, we have wonderful speakers come on and share their experience and share some old tools. Carla's here from Georgia. Joe's from New Zealand. Abby's from Adelaide, Australia. I am just so disappointed. Right now, like in a couple of days, I was supposed to be taking off for the UK and then on to Australia, but that's not happening. Hey, Lisa from Pennsylvania and Maura from Massachusetts. I'm so glad you're all here. So we're all here because someone we love has died. So I just like to take a moment as we begin just to send love to them. You know, I think that connection is so important, whether you believe they live in your heart, the afterlife, or heaven. I just like to spend a moment just in honor of all those who have died. So if you would join me. Thank you. You know, it's interesting during the day when I do that, I send love to my parents and send love to my son. In the evening when I do it, I send love to someone in my guest life. Brennan, I sent love to your mom and thanked her for being here, for you being here. And
Thank
Donna, I sent love to your sister, right? It would be your
Yeah.
sister.
Yes.
So I'm so grateful you're both here. So, Donna, as I said, you're one of my favorite people in the world. And you and I met at Compassionate Friends. And I was just there being a father, trying to be underground and just dealing with my own pain. And you were so kind to me there. And your life and story has touched me. You ended up being in my book, Finding Meaning. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got into this world, Donna, and touch on that story if you would.
I will, David. Thank you so much. I mean, I think most of us, you don't have to look very far back, either with your parents or your grandparents, to recognize that there were deaths in your family and gaps between children. And, we sometimes think that siblings we didn't know or people we didn't know who died don't impact us. And when I was growing up in Philadelphia, I have two older brothers. I'm the only girl, the youngest. Every June, my mother would get very depressed, and my father would say, "It's about that baby. By the 4th of July, she'll be fine." You know, and we knew like there was a baby, but we knew also we weren't supposed to ask about it. And ultimately, through my grandmother, I found out it was a girl. Her name was supposed to be Lynn, which is now my middle name. She died at 5 days old. My parents were 19 and 20 in like 1947, 1948. And it was kind of shaming, actually, to have an infant die in those days. My mother never spoke about it, ever, but we all knew. And I was well into my work at the Dougy Center, listening to and working with grieving children. And, people would say, "Why are you in this work?" And I'm like, "I don't know, nothing personal." And I was, probably in my mid 40s before I put it together like, oh, I had a sister. My parents were impacted by that. I wonder what that was like. And I wound up calling my mother, who's Irish, very, pull up your bootstraps, stiff upper lip stuff, thinking I'm going to ask her about this. And it was, 50 years later, something like that, 60 years later. And I thought she would just say, "I don't want to talk about it," or hang up. And I wound up listening to her for 3.5 hours.
Wow.
It was the first time she had ever talked about it. And David, what I recognized from that was, even though this was a sister I didn't know, my life was deeply impacted by her death because my parents never dealt with it to my father's dying day. My mother's 91. They never knew how to deal with it. And so these unaddressed deaths and unaddressed losses that are in many of our lives that we are deeply impacted by without even necessarily knowing it.
Wow. And there was a question you asked that was so shocking. I'm trying to think what the question was. Do you know what I mean? You said something like, when did you know that you and dad weren't meant to be together or would divorce?
Oh, yeah. So my parents were married for 40 years. And actually,
everyone, 40 years of marriage.
Yeah, 40 years of marriage.
Right?
Got divorced actually on their anniversary, which was really bizarre timing. But I said to my mother, in your mind, when was your marriage over? And she looked at me and said, when I came home from the hospital without the baby, and we could never talk about it.
Wow.
So, again, this stuff it goes underground, it festers, we need to have ways to get it out, ways to share with others. And our society doesn't always build that in very well.
And I also remember and that was also a different time. We're still not great about infant deaths.
Yeah.
Getting better, but we still have a ways to go. But I remember, I think you said your mom even asked, like, what happened to the baby? And your dad said, we took care of it.
Yeah, my grandfather, her father, said, don't worry about it. We took care of everything, which meant we took everything out of your apartment that would have indicated that you were even going to have a baby. So when my mother went back to their apartment, everything was gone. And literally, my parents never spoke of it again for for the rest of his life.
And that was the moment she knew this marriage wasn't working, and then stayed in it for 40 more years.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
mind-boggling. And
Yeah.
people talk about that story all the time from Finding Meaning. And it's also just about that old notion about, if we clear the house and pretend it didn't happen, you are fine.
Yeah.
And
if we just don't talk about it,
proof that you're not fine.
Yeah. If we just don't talk about it. And I think that's very true with children as well. It's like growing up that way, like we knew, but we also knew we weren't supposed to talk about it.
Right. Well, that's how you were taught about grief.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Today we were talking about what happens if any of you want to go back and watch it. We talked about friends who don't get it. And we were also talking about sometimes it's not about you that they're not talking about it. I mean, Donna, you through your work have learned to talk about it. But if you never went into this work and maybe were a lawyer or something else, you would have had this belief, we never talk about grief, and we might have called you not a good friend. But that's how you were taught to deal with grief.
Exactly. Yeah. It's demonstrated to us by our parents, by our adult caregivers, whoever they are, and by society as well. So it's, our own system and then into larger society.
Right. Brennan, so you know this work intimately and personally. Would you sort of share about your early life and how you got to be where you are today and what you're doing?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. I do know this work intimately, and I, along with Donna, work at the Dougy Center as a staff person, but I came to the Dougy Center a long, long time ago, actually. And the Dougy Center was started in 1982 by a nurse named Bev Chappell, and she was kind of interested in the end of life field, and her husband was a pediatrician, and she really recognized that kids weren't often part of the conversation when things were happening to other family members. This was in the late 70s. And she really wondered about that and kind of saw the ripple effects of that. And
there was some connection with Kubler-Ross, with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, wasn't there?
Right. Yeah, she had taken a few of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's seminars, and she.
And I think Dougie wrote to Elizabeth.
Right. Yeah. So Dougie wrote to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth connected Bev with Dougie. And Dougie was 13 at the time, and he came to OHSU here in Portland for treatment for an inoperable brain tumor. And when Bev met Dougie, Dougie would go around to the other kids in the hospital, and he wanted to connect about his situation. So he would ask questions and talk about it. He'd say to the other kids that were sick, what do you think is going to happen when we die? I think I'm going to die. Do you think you're going to die? Do you think we'll ever get to kiss girls? He really wanted to talk about it. And what Bev learned from Dougie is that kids help other kids, that they really speak the same language. And so with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's encouragement, she started the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon in 1982. And it was this, fledgling organization. And actually, Donna got involved not long after that as a board member and volunteer. And luckily, I grew up in Portland. And for me, my mother died at 36 years old of breast cancer. And it was 3 days after my 12th birthday that she died. And my family, we were a young family. My dad was 38. My mom was 36. I had an older brother and an older sister. And, my parents just did not have the tools to navigate her illness or her death. And, the aftermath of her death was incredibly rough for all of us. And as a 12-year-old, it was just really tough for me. And what I remember actually is kind of having a meltdown in the kitchen and my dad saying to me, "You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay." And I remember saying, like, "What if I'm not? Dad, what are you going to do?" And he said, "I heard about this place called the Dougy Center. I have no idea what they do, but do you want to go?" Right. And I said, yes. And so not long after, I walked through the doors of the Dougy Center for the first time. And I say this all the time, but the Dougy Center saved my life. I might still be alive, but it would be an entirely different life if I hadn't gone through the program. Being with other kids who have had a similar death in their family. Right now, we're serving 550 kids a month and 425 adult family members, so almost 1,000 people a month in person in peer support groups. And we've transitioned virtually in this moment because of COVID-19. But, being with other kids who'd had a similar experience, being with the adult volunteers and adult staff members was critical. And so for me, it was life-changing, it was life-saving. And learning that grief is natural and normal and healthy. And, really we grieve as deeply as we love and as deeply as we feel, because it's not always just love. It's all these complicated emotions. But grief is a natural part of the human existence. And I learned that. And for me, learning that was so critical, because what I saw often around me was people trying to keep grief apart or away from themselves. And that, as we know, doesn't work, and it's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. So after going through the Dougy Center program, I ended up doing a lot of volunteering. I was a volunteer facilitator and worked with kids, and I met Donna when I was 14 years old. So that's 31 years ago now. I met Donna. And maybe even 13. But I remember being on a stage with Donna, being kind of the token grieving kid, and telling my story. And Donna was teaching folks about children and grief. And I remember looking at her and being like, this is what I want to do. I want to be her. And how do I do that? And so very fortunately for me, Donna has always been a friend and a mentor. And I volunteered for a lot of years at the Dougy Center in my teenage years. I left Portland for about a decade. And then I moved back to Portland 15 years ago. And I moved back to work at the Dougy Center. I wanted to support the work that the Dougy Center is doing, knowing that, the Dougy Center model has been replicated all across the country and around the world. The impact that the Dougy Center has on grieving kids and families is just, it's really not measurable. And so I started off as the receptionist, and 10 years later, I moved into the executive director role when Donna decided it was time for her to transition out of administration. And so I've been the executive director for the last 5 years. And about, 4 years ago now, almost 5 years ago, my family welcomed another member of our immediate family. So my husband and I adopted our daughter Jordan after the death of both of her parents. And so we became Dougy Center parents as well. And seeing the Dougy Center through that lens, through her grief, has been just amazing to see the impact on her, and in ways that she doesn't even recognize. But of course, from my perspective, I can see it and see that the impact is huge for her.
And it's interesting. I was honored to speak at the Dougy Center when I was up there recently, and when we could go around and speak and go places and do things.
Yeah.
I talked about, this is so meaningful to me because as a kid, I had trauma and grief and was not attended to in any way.
Yeah.
And a couple of things I think about that, number one, we hear kids are resilient, and we're all resilient. But I can tell you, I was resilient, but some support would have been nice.
Yeah.
And there was nothing like that then.
Yeah.
So I think about, we need support.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of what adults go through is also shaped by how our family did grief and what happened to us as children.
Yeah.
So I'm just, your biggest fan when it comes to helping children and grieving a loss that they've had. So what do you think is sort of the biggest misconception we have about our children and grief?
Well, I want to tap into what you just said, David, which was children are resilient, but they're not resilient in a vacuum.
Right.
So not all children do well after trauma or after a death. Right. So there are factors that lead to them faring better. And of course, one of them is how the adults in their lives are dealing with their own grief, if they have it, and how they are supporting their child or children through that. But I think some of the easy things are tell the truth. Don't lie to your children. Don't withhold really important information that they'll probably find out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
When you lie to them and they find out the truth, then they can't trust you, anything you say. Right. And I think just be curious about I think we're in such a hurry to fix them, make them feel better. And I understand that it's not easy to watch a child be in pain, but we have to allow them to be sad, be mad, be whatever they need to be. And I think we're too quick to try to do fixes. And sometimes it's because it's too hard for me to see your pain. And if we can just relax and ask them questions like, well, what's that like for you? And what does that mean for you? We're going to learn a lot from them.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, please.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that my experience of being a grieving child, much like many others, was that the adults around me wanted to fix it. They wanted to make it better. And one of the wonderful things for me about being at the Dougy Center was that the adults there just allowed me to have my pain and experience that. And instead of saying things that I was hearing outside of the walls of the Dougy Center, like, you have to be strong, your mom was so incredible, you've got to live on in her memory, which puts a lot of pressure on kids. I heard things like, that sounds really hard, do you want to tell me about it? Or, I remember that your mom made incredible Halloween costumes. If you were going to have her make a Halloween costume this year, what would you want her to make for you? Things that honored her memory and allowed me my pain.
Right. And I think back to, my own experience in a child's mind. One of the things that I can remember with my grief being so unattended to as a child is my mother had kidney disease and was supposed to be on a special diet, which she and my father were not following. And I can remember my mom, when she was sick, would have me make her sandwiches with luncheon meats that you should not have. And I didn't realize all that. And I can remember a discussion in the hospital where, I think I forgot whether it was a doctor or someone said, you gave her what? Don't you know? I mean, that contributes to it. And there was no one to, as I don't have to tell you two expert, what did children do? We personalize it. We think it's our fault. I grew up thinking I contributed to her death. Yeah. And it took a long time for me to work through, wait a minute, the adults should have been in charge of that. I was just the go-to kid that was sort of grabbing what's in the refrigerator. But our mind takes on so much fault finding, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
It does. And it's actually not unusual because for children to think that they contributed to a sibling's death, a parent's death, even a friend's death, either by something they did or by something they didn't do. Like if I'd just been a better kid, or if I hadn't asked him to pick me up from my basketball game, or, and they don't always verbalize that. They're not always even aware of it, but it's not uncommon.
And Sure. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just going to say guilt and feeling responsible is such a huge part of all of this, isn't it? I mean,
And so how do you deal with kids in that guilt? How do you help them with their guilt?
Well, one of the things I do is ask them, if they'll say something like, if only I had not told my father to pick me up at this time, maybe he wouldn't have been in that car crash. So it's my fault. Right. And instead of, what we often do is like, no, it's not your fault, is to say, so what if he had picked you up at a different time? What would that have looked like? To unpack it with them. Because typically when you start to do that, most often they'll say, well, I wasn't really in control of that. That wasn't my decision. So they're coming to their own understanding that it's a wish I had, like an if only and a what if. But when we jump in and just say, it wasn't your fault, don't feel that way, what we're doing is stifling their ability to try to understand it, to make sense of it, to make their own narrative around it.
And kids just connect dots, that, mom said, oh my goodness, you wear me out. Mm-hmm. And then later when mom's dying of cancer and she's so tired, they're like, oh, I wore mom out.
Yeah, I should have been a better kid.
Right. Are you two up for taking some questions?
Sure.
Absolutely. All right. So anyone who wants to ask some questions about you as a child or children now, there's a few questions that came in that I want to grab some. All right, let me see here. A lot of people are agreeing with you. All right, Andrea says, how do I talk to our 2.5-year-old about his daddy that won't ever be coming home again? Mm-hmm. Daddy, where is he? He asked me. So
well, one thing we have to understand is it's the nature of children that age to be repetitive. So it's not like you answer once and then they don't ask again. So that's part of being 2.5, part of being 3. I think you answer in the way that is in your belief system. So you say, it's sad, but daddy died. And when you die, we can't see him anymore. He's in our heart, or we have pictures, but he can't walk, he can't drink food, he can't laugh, he can't poop anymore. He can't do any of those things. They're not going to understand right away what dead is. They will understand gone. They might not even understand not coming back, but you just put it in very, very concrete terms.
Right.
And be prepared to continue to answer those same questions.
So you mentioned this a little bit, Donna, but I'm going to re-ask it to you, Brennan, a little more directly. That comes up all the time. What if we're not telling little kids it was a death by suicide? Should we tell them? What do you think? I know that's a big one that comes up.
Yeah, well, I'll answer it a little bit, and then I'll also let Donna chime in as well. But I think that telling kids the truth in a age-appropriate way is critical. Kids need to know the truth and know that they can trust you. And oftentimes, kids at any age have heard things that they have taken in that we have no idea that they've heard. I think back to a story, and this was from a long time ago, of a kid coming to the Dougy Center. And, we work with families to help them learn and know how to tell the kids the truth. And this was a very long time ago. A little boy was around 9, and he came into a group. And in our opening circle for our group, we give kids the opportunity to share their story, their name, their age, who died, and how they died. And we offer that opportunity for every group, so that kids can get comfortable with that story and tell more parts of that story over time. And this little boy introduced himself, and his father had died of suicide through carbon monoxide poisoning in his car. And it was his turn, and he introduced himself, and he said, my dad killed himself in the car, but don't tell my mom, she thinks it was a car accident. Because his mom had been saying he died in a car accident, and this little boy knew the truth, whether it was through friends who knew the truth or just hearing adult conversations that adults didn't know he was listening to. He knew the truth. And it's so critical that we tell kids the truth and answer their questions. And if the answer is, I don't know, that's a perfectly okay answer. And again, I'll let Donna kind of speak to this as well. But that's, my belief is that we should tell kids the truth because it's helpful for them and the right thing.
Well, and I also think because of social media now, it's even more important. They will hear it. They will hear it from others.
And then they're going to go, wait, they're not telling me the truth. Did I do something?
Mm-hmm.
And also, what else are they not telling me?
Right.
How can I trust you? How can I trust you now?
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the big challenges, and I feel this as a parent, is we want to protect our children and we don't want them to be in pain. And, I don't know if I told this story when I was there, but I was really challenged when my younger son died a couple of years later. I was giving a talk in Santa Monica. It was like 200-300 people. And my older son came, who was, still was young at the time. He came with his girlfriend, sat in back. And I was like, oh, I've been wanting my son to hear this grief information, And afterwards, he came up and he said to me, hey, could I have asked you a question during the Q&A? And I went, sure, of course you could ask me a question about grief and during the Q&A. And I said, by the way, you can ask me a question anytime you want. And he said, okay, I'll wait till your next talk. And, inside as a parent, I'm like, tell me now, what's your question? But I had to just give him the dignity of letting him ask his question in his time, not to soothe my uncomfortableness. As parents, don't we just want to fix our kids to get them past the grief so they can have an amazing life?
Yeah. And David, you bring up such an important point, which is allowing them in their time to unfold what they need to ask.
Right.
It may not be all at once. And also just developmentally, a 10-year-old is probably going to ask different questions than a 16-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 3-year-old. So, it's not one story told in one sitting.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I know that, yes, as a parent, I want to make it as easy as possible on my kids. And as a grieving child, though, and now where I stand, as a 45-year-old person, I recognize that by going through what I went through and by really working through that and carrying that grief, and I learned how to make meaning out of what I've been through. I learned how, through my work at the Dougy Center and outside of that, but I think learning from the Dougy Center kind of that grief is a part of life and it is okay and normal and natural. And I was able to make meaning out of what I've been through in a way that I never could have if truly someone was able to quote unquote fix it or take it away. And now as an adult, I recognize that there's this beauty in holding both things to be true, right? I am eternally grateful of the gifts that I've been given because my mother died. I'm a stronger person. I have made meaning out of things. I have this career. There's so much beauty that has come from that horrible thing. And at the same time, the truth is that I would never, ever, ever want to have my mother die to get all of those gifts. So, you can have both. And I think that as parents, we want to make sure that we fix it for our kids, but sometimes going through these things lead to a deeper appreciation for, as Donna would say, the beauty and brevity of life.
Right. And I know for me, when I was 13 and my mom died in the mass shooting and all that, I would have loved a Dougy Center to help me. I would have loved it. And I didn't get any of that. But on top of that, there is grief work I did in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, in my 50s when I reached my mother's age. And no parent could have compacted my healing into fixing it, when I was 14. And I think as parents, we want to do that. We want to get it fixed, and it's hard to get. There's nothing to fix. It's grief. They're not broken.
Yeah.
Some more questions here. Brenda says, my grandson was 9 months old when his dad died. He's now 2. How do we introduce this idea to him? His mom takes him to the cemetery regularly, but what else can we say? So he's 2 years old now and was 9 months. And this is grandmother asking.
Yeah, well, I think you share photos. If you have photos and you say, this is your daddy, he died, and it's really pretty simple because they're learning, like, what does died mean and what does daddy mean and why don't I get to see him? But the thing that we want to do is keep the memory of our loved ones alive.
Right.
We don't want to not talk about them. We want to talk about who they were. And this little boy will likely, as a young man, want to know about his father. In what ways am I like him? In what ways am I not like him? What kind of a man was he? And we don't always encourage those kinds of conversations. And that's unfortunate.
I think the relationship with the parent who died continues on, and or the person who died, whatever the relationship is, that relationship continues on. And there's this opportunity to help children create and maintain a relationship with the person who died through family traditions, through different ways of remembering and honoring the person. And I think that can be really hard for people who are also grieving, to engage with their kids around that. But if as a family that there's things that you can do to honor that person's memory and remember them, then you give your kids this opportunity to continue that relationship. I still have a mom. She died when I was 12 years old, but I still have a relationship with her. I think about her all the time. She taught me the art of kind of making every day a celebration through the way that she lived. And so the way that I live is in honor of her. And I often say my prayer, or my life, is a prayer to my mother. And that's a beautiful and powerful thing. It's not the same as having her here, but helping kids to maintain those relationships can really be a gift to them.
Right. This next question I'd like you both to answer, and then after that we're going to ping pong back and forth because we got a lot of questions. So for a child and for a teenager in the age of COVID-19, if you can't see a family member as they died in the hospital and there isn't a funeral, what's your advice?
Well, one of the things I would say is you can always have your own sort of ceremony, whatever you want to call that. You can light candles, you can share memories, you can write letters to the person, you can share with each other, you can make videos, you can do Zoom calls. They're not the ideal, but there are situations prior to this where family members could not be present for a service that was there. So being able to connect in some ways, and I like the idea of punctuating, having some sort of ritual that you're gathering together to say this happened.
Right. Brennan, anything you want to add to that?
I just reiterate what Donna said. I think ceremony and ritual can still happen. It's not ideal. It looks different. I shared a news article earlier today with the staff of the Dougy Center of a family that wasn't able to be there for the service of the mother who died in an assisted care facility. And they live streamed it to the family, and they Zoomed, and they had local neighbors came together, even though they didn't know the woman, and cut flowers from their garden, and one embroidered something to be placed on the casket. And folks are gathering together in virtual ways. And I think that's a beautiful way to honor the person's life, even when we can't be together in person.
I had a family member who was dying, and their child could not be there. Mm. And as they were dying, they were actually quite beautiful. And the child was very young at the time. And I took a picture. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't the time then to show the picture, but there will be a time to share that picture. Mm-hmm. All right. Mara says, my son still gets upset that he did not have a birthday as my mom died on his birthday. My son still wants to know why he could not have a birthday that year. Brennan, what would you say to that child?
I guess if it were me and I was that child or that parent, I would want to listen to their concerns. I think validating that experience for the child could be really helpful, like really just listening to it and understanding it. We do a lot of reflection with kids at the Dougy Center, where instead of offering a response that tries to take away feelings, we just reflect back to the kid what they're experiencing and what they're going through, and potentially problem solving and brainstorming together about what would it look like for you to have that now. Can we go have a celebration? Can we do something different? What would work for you to feel like you got that day, or some sort of honoring of what that experience was like?
Yeah, that validation is so important. I think even right now with the virus, it's so easy to just say to a child, no, you can't have a play date. You can't have a birthday party. Don't you get there's a virus? But to a child, they're not in the big picture. Their birthday has been taken away. Their play dates are taken away. They're not in the big picture of a virus or a death.
Yeah.
Right. Andrea says, my mom died on Monday. Oh, Andrea, our heart goes out to you. When we were told he had 48 hours, I cried deep cries all day. My kids, preteens and teen, have seen it. I don't hide anything. However, I'm too vulnerable or share and show my kids maybe things I should protect them from. My mom hides so much from me, and I'm 100% the opposite. I wish I could be more balanced. What do you think a balanced approach would look like? How about you, Donna, for that one?
Well, I think it's important to show your children that it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel what you feel. I mean, too many people go into a room, close the door, come out. It was clear that they were crying and they say they're fine. So that's another extreme that isn't helpful. What I would advise is to find ways to take care of yourself, to do things that nurture you. Whatever that may be, listen to music, take a warm bath, take time to reflect. It's okay to cry. What you don't want is for your children to have to parent you. That's kind of the line that I draw. Don't put them in the role of, they can comfort you, but not to switch roles where they have to become your parent.
Oh, and as a parent, so hard.
Yeah.
So hard. I can tell you when my younger son, after he died, I would say to my older son, how are you doing? And then I would begin crying. And yeah. And the grief expert in me goes, you asked him how he was, and then you went into your own feeling. And I'm like, oh, and that's why I can't be his counselor. He can't be mine. And we share a loss, but we can't be each other's counselor.
Yeah.
Mara goes on to say about her son, she did give him cupcakes that day. And it's been 2 years and he still asks me. And, I think the thing is, it just sounds like there's an acknowledged disappointment and sadness there that sounds like,
even to say, I wish I could have done it differently.
Yeah. Right. Regina says, it's not too late for us as adults to help ourselves regarding the lack of grief support we should have gotten in children. Oh, is it too late? Can we help ourselves? Can we heal?
I don't think it's ever too late. I really don't. And, whether you do that kind of thing through reading, reflection, through talking with friends, or through, professional quality grief therapy or counseling,
Right.
groups. There's lots of venues, but it really is never too late.
I went on a retreat with Hope Edelman. It was a motherless daughters retreat. And
Right.
what was so fascinating to me, I think there were about 25 women there. And some of the women were in their late 60s, early 70s. And this was the first time they'd ever talked about their mother dying. And all of the women in this retreat had mothers that died very early in their lives. And, you know, this was their first time, and it was powerful and meaningful. It's never too late.
I had a man who came to one of my retreats and workshops in his 90s.
Wow.
He dealt with his father dying.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. Karen says, my sister doesn't think it was a good idea for my son to say goodbye to his grandma in hospice. I couldn't imagine not allowing him that time. We think it's better parents, our parent hat gets in the way. And we think, I want to save my kids and protect them from that horrible goodbye at the hospital or the hospice. But that's not really the reality. That's not what's best for them.
No, really, what's best for them is informed choice. So let them know what's going to happen, what the room looks like, what they may see, what they may smell, what they may face, and say, you know, maybe I have concerns about you having that last image of grandma, but I want to respect what you want to do. It's when we force them to do things or when we don't allow them to do things that it winds up kind of coming back at us in ways that aren't so helpful.
I remember a social worker in the ICU used to have, when parents would say, I don't want my child to go in the ICU, she would have the children draw pictures of what they thought their loved one looked like in the ICU. Mm-hmm. And the pictures were always so much more horrible than the actual what was going on.
Yeah.
That our imaginations can be our worst enemies.
Yeah, like it must be so horrible that you don't want me to see it. And then it's difficult to let those images go if you don't have a reality to base it in.
Right. And I remember one of the photos I saw was they said, you know, grandpa's on a machine, blah, 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 and all that. And the child drew this machine crushing grandpa and blood. I mean, it was just horrific. And I'm like, no, the machine's next to the bed. It's not hurting him. It's not on him. He's not on it. But if they don't see it, you know.
Yeah.
Jennifer says, how do you help kids? This is such a good one here. How do you help kids who appear not to be grieving? My 10-year-old does not want to talk about her 14-year-old brother who died by suicide January 10th. Oh my gosh. And January 10th in grief terms is like the day before yesterday.
Yeah.
She had a panic attack when I tried to take her to counseling before the COVID quarantine. She now appears to be functioning again, but I'm worried about her not processing death.
Well, I go back to, it's not a one-time event.
Yeah.
Children process things in different ways. Not all children or teens are big talkers. So you're in it for the long haul. This is a long-term thing, coming to terms with death, with grief. And I just would say, you know, look out for signs that, things I look for that are problematic: hurting herself, hurting other people, big changes in behavior that could be potentially destructive. But otherwise, journey along with her. Give her time. That it's not been very long. She may still just be in like, I can't believe this happened.
And let me drill down on that. So I could see me doing this. If I had a child who's young like she does, and the child is doing okay now, I would think, well, I'm going to wait till there's a tough moment before I'm going to try to introduce counseling again. Should we introduce those thoughts in the tough moments, in the good moments? Is there any rhyme or reason to that?
I like kind of a sort of a one down approach, which is to say, as a parent, I want to know that I'm doing everything that I can to be helpful to you. But honestly, I don't know what all those things are. This is new to me too.
Right.
And so from time to time, I might ask you things that are annoying. And so you can just say, stop it. That's annoying. But I am going to check in with you. And, I may want to see if at some point you want to talk to somebody else who's not me.
Right. I always say kids don't want to talk about sex or grief with their parents.
For good reason.
For good reason. Right. That's appropriate boundaries. And what else would you say are some issues that we should be aware of with our kids in grief work? I mean, does every child need counseling? Does every child need a group? What's your thoughts on that?
I'll just say this, and then I want one statement, and then off to you, Brennan. But I don't believe that every grieving child, every grieving teen, every grieving adult needs professional help. Some do, and it may be because of pre-existing issues. It could be all kinds of reasons. Some will absolutely benefit from, and I want to say, qualified grief counselors or therapists. Grief is not a disease. It's not a mental disorder. So I would say everyone would benefit, will benefit, and does need support. What that support looks like may vary. It could be the support of friends or family that is fine for them. Off to you, Brennan, in terms of the value of support groups.
Well, I think support groups are amazing, and oftentimes kids and teens can be hesitant to join them. We do have a lot of families at the Dougy Center, I think, that bribe their kids or teens to get them to the first group. And then we hear all the time from teens that they didn't know that was what it was going to be like, and they're so grateful that they're there. We have just a lot of teens in our program that express that. What I would also say is that kids need opportunities for expression that work for those kids. So some kids are going to be talkers and they're going to want to talk about it. Some kids, it's through art or music. And at the Dougy Center, we try to provide a lot of different opportunities for self-expression so that kids can express themselves through whatever means works for them. And I think as a parent, knowing your child and knowing that maybe they're not going to ever be a talk about it kind of kid, but they might really benefit from a journal. We have different activity books and journals available through the Dougy Center, and tip sheets and downloadable activities. And all of those kinds of things could also be helpful for kids that just might want to do it on their own or process it on their own. So you have to kind of tailor things to your child. And again, I think this is that the saying might sound a little trite, that it's a marathon, not a sprint, but it really is. This is a long-term process. And so what works for a child in this moment might be completely different than what they need a year from now, 6 weeks from now, 6 years from now. And kind of committing to that long haul and saying, I'm here and I'm going to keep checking in on you, and offering different ways to process what they've gone through.
And I'll just add, there's no one size fits all. There's no one magic wand, one that works for everyone.
And I'll tell you one thing I think is so important for parents, that whatever you introduce, you have to introduce it in a way that doesn't make the kid wrong.
Yeah.
I've seen kids being drugged into a counselor's office with the kids present going, what's wrong with them? Why aren't they crying about their dad? And, the kids just, all they hear is, I'm doing this wrong.
Yeah.
And, that's so important, that on top of grief, they don't feel wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
So this next question can help us wrap up here, because time flies. Is there a Dougy Center in New York? Can you tell us about the Dougy Center, how people can find out? Do you have anything going on right now we should know about?
Yeah, that's sure. So one of the wonderful things that Donna has done for the world is to help found the National Alliance for Grieving Children. And that is a group of folks that have come together. We're all in the grief field, and there are programs, many of which are based on the Dougy Center model, all across the country and throughout the world. And you can find those on the Dougy Center website, as well as through the National Alliance for Grieving Children. The Dougy Center website is dougy.org, and super easy to find.
For us.
Sure, DOUGY.org. And we are working on a new website, but on our website, there's tip sheets, resources. Our podcast, Grief Out Loud, is a great resource for folks.
I was on it. I love it.
Yeah.
It's a great podcast. Folks should listen to it.
That's awesome. And if there's folks out there that want to learn more, through our website's a great way. Also through our Facebook, and we do have a big event coming up a week from tonight at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. That is a big fundraiser, online virtual auction and benefit. We'll be live streaming through our Facebook page, and we also have auction items available now. And I'll get you some links, so maybe you can.
Great, I'll post them in there, right in the comments section.
That's great.
And I tell you, if whenever I see, and I've said this before, whenever I see a silent auction, it's sort of a double thing that you feel good about what you're getting, and you feel good that you're helping.
Well, the auction is open for you.
All right. So I'll post that in the comments right after this.
Thank you. I'll send it.
Thank you both for the work you are doing. It's just amazing. The Dougy Center is amazing. So I'm just so honored to be friends with you and be part of the Dougy Center in just a little small way. And I just honor that work.
Thank you, David. And we can't wait to have you back when it's safe to travel again. Come see us in Portland. And thanks so much for inviting us. Really, always lovely speaking with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Brennan, thank you so much too. I appreciate you being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
So as we wrap up, I just want you to know that I am here every day, 1 p.m. Pacific time. And then again so it's 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. You can go to the timezoneconverter.com to see where it is in your local time. I talk about tools and things during the day. Then we have speakers on tonight because I want you to know, I'm only one voice in grief. There's many, many voices in grief. We've got amazing people just like these two who are here today that are going to be on. We're going to be talking about, tomorrow night, we're going to be talking about men in grief with Garrick's going to be here. Paul Denniston, Bradley Vinson's going to be here. Garrick Caldwell. And then Sunday night, sex and grief. Isn't that going to be interesting? Whether it's people find out their spouse, partner was unfaithful and before they died, or you've had a loss and you're trying to figure out how to deal with sex again. So that's going to be Dr. Tammy Nelson, who's really, really wonderful. Monday, Catherine Schwarzenegger Pratt. I always have to remember to add her new last name now that she's married Chris Pratt and she's pregnant. So I'm so honored. She's coming on. She's going to talk about forgiveness, which is going to be wonderful. Then Tuesday, we're going to have Susie Orman, who's going to talk about money and grief. So all these folks who are showing up are doing it for you because they really want you to know that you matter and your loss matters. Then I think Wednesday, we have Will Reeve, who's going to be talking about the death of his father, Superman, Christopher Reeves. So amazing people are coming on. Those are all in the evenings. By the way, with the Susie Orman, if you have financial questions, send them to me at david@grief.com. Put in the subject line, Susie. We don't want you posting any questions about your finances here. So just send those in an email and we'll ask Susie when she's here with us on Tuesday. Thank you all for being here. I'm only here 2 hours a day. You folks are supporting each other the other 22 hours. I love that you are sharing your pain, sharing your love, sharing your grief. And even if you have a good day, you're sharing that. You're being an elder. You're giving other people hope. So thank you all so much for being here, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care.